So this is question 1 for the algebra review, question 1. So the question says, given the graph y equals log, that says b, log b of x, find the domain of the inverse function. So, first things first, we have to determine the domain and range. So, domain and range. So, if we look at the graph here, you can see on the domain that it goes and it never touches this 0. So the 0 is going to be our limit, but it never touches, so we're going to do parentheses, and then 0, comma, and then it goes on forever. So infinity, and then end parentheses. For the range, it's going to go up forever, it's going to go up forever, and it's going to go down forever. So our range would be a negative infinity. Now, because we're looking for the inverse of it, we're going to flip the domain or range, or better, x and y. You can think of domain as x, r as y. Whenever you're looking at inverse, you're flipping the x and y. So the range would now be the x for the inverse. So I'm just going to put I d and I r for inverse domain and inverse range. Sorry, my brain went blank. So because we're flipping these, the old y is going to be the x for this one. So our domain for the inverse is negative to positive infinity. And then the inverse of the inverse range is the opposite of the domain, so it would be 0, infinity. See how we flipped it? Just like how you flip the x and y in the inverse functions. So now that we have this, we're going to look back at our equation. So if we look at our answer choices, we're looking for the domain of the inverse function. A says not enough information to find the domain. B says the domain of the inverse is negative infinity. C says the domain of the inverse is 0, infinity. And D says the domain of the inverse is negative infinity, 0. So if we look back here, we're looking at the inverse domain, and we see here it's negative infinity. So looking at our questions, we can tell that it's going to be B. Thank you very much.